Imagine being the most powerful director in the history of Hollywood. Imagine having your name etched into the fabric of cinema itself. Jaws, E.T., Schindler's List, Jurassic Park, Saving Private Ryan, Indiana Jones. Imagine winning 2 Oscars, multiple Emmys, a Tony, and then at the age of 79, finally completing your EGOT by winning a Grammy. Imagine building a career so monumental that the very word Spielberg has become a synonym for cinematic excellence. And then imagine, after all of that, after all the red carpets, the standing ovations, the billion-dollar box offices, the Lifetime Achievement Awards, that the thing people are whispering about most is not your next movie. It is your funeral. Because somewhere between his 78th and 79th year on this earth, Stephen Allen Spielberg, the boy from Cincinnati, the rejected USC film school applicant, the kid who turned a cardboard box into a film studio, said something that sent shockwaves through Hollywood. Quietly, in a way that only the truly powerful can afford to be quiet, he made it known that when the time comes, when the curtain finally falls on the greatest show in Hollywood history, there are certain people who will not be welcome at the closing ceremony. There is a list, and the names on that list have turned some of the biggest heads in the entertainment industry. Now, before you assume this is the ranting of a bitter old man counting down his days, let me stop you right there. This is Steven Spielberg we are talking about. A man who has never done anything by accident. A man who crafted every single frame of every single film with laser-sharp intentionality. A man who, for more than 50 years, has told the world's most complex, emotional, and profound stories, and told them better than anyone else alive. When Steven Spielberg makes a decision, any decision, it means something. It is deliberate. It is considered. And it is final. So when the man says he does not want certain people at his funeral, you do not dismiss it as the rambling of an old director going soft. You pay attention. You ask why. You dig deep into a life that, despite producing some of the most publicly celebrated art in human history, has been lived almost entirely in private. And when you start digging, what you find is not pretty. What you find is a man who has spent nearly 8 decades absorbing wounds, swallowing silences, enduring betrayals, and quietly cataloging every single soul who chose ambition over integrity when it came to dealing with Steven Spielberg. This is that story. To understand why a man chooses who attends his funeral, you first have to understand the man himself. And the real Steven Spielberg, not the Hollywood brand, not the visionary genius, not the museum exhibit, the real Steven Spielberg began not on a movie set but in a modest Jewish household in Cincinnati, Ohio, on December 18, 1946. He was the eldest of 4 children and the only son born to Arnold Spielberg, a computer engineer who worked for General Electric, and Leah Posner, a concert pianist and restaurateur whose warmth and vivacity filled every room she entered. On the surface, it sounds like a perfectly respectable American upbringing. But surfaces, as any good filmmaker will tell you, are always deceiving. Steven was a peculiar child in the most endearing sense of the word. He was anxious, imaginative, and deeply sensitive, a boy who saw the world not as it was, but as it could be if you just pointed a camera at the right angle. From the very beginning, movies were not just entertainment for young Steven. They were survival. When the nightmares came, and they came often, because Steven was a child who feared nearly everything, the only thing that could quiet the monsters was story. Not prayer. Not comfort from parents.
Story.
His own stories, the ones he told himself through his first 8mm camera, the one his father bought him to document family camping trips and which Steven immediately commandeered to film train wrecks, alien invasions, and westerns featuring his Boy Scout troop. But behind the suburban scenes of family life, something was fracturing. Arnold and Leah Spielberg's marriage was quietly disintegrating, and the dissolution of that marriage would leave marks on Steven so deep that you can still see them etched into nearly every film he has ever made. The divorce, finalized in 1966 when Steven was 19, was devastating enough on its own. But the circumstances made it catastrophic. Leah had fallen in love with Arnold's best friend, a man named Bernie Adler. She had not hidden this from her children. She had, in fact, eventually married Bernie. And Steven, who adored his mother and idolized his father, found himself standing at the rubble of the two people he loved most, trying to figure out which pieces belonged to which person. For years, Steven blamed his father. He spent more than a decade barely speaking to Arnold Spielberg, and the absence of a father figure became the loudest silence in all of his films. Think about it. Elliot in E.T. had no father. He was there one day and gone the next, leaving a wound so raw that a lonely, frightened boy formed the most profound friendship of his life with an alien from another world. Roy Neary in Close Encounters of the Third Kind abandoned his family in pursuit of something he could not explain. Indiana Jones spent an entire movie emotionally wrestling with his complicated, cold, emotionally absent father before they found each other again in the desert. David in AI was a synthetic child desperate for a mother who ultimately let him down. The pattern is not subtle. The pattern is Steven Spielberg screaming the story of his own childhood onto the biggest screens in the world for 50 years, hoping that someone, somewhere, would understand. What makes the story of Spielberg's parents even more extraordinary is what happened decades later. In one of the most emotional reversals in Hollywood history, Steven eventually reconciled with his father, not after one dramatic confrontation, but slowly, painfully, through the act of making movies. The Fabelmans, his 2022 semi-autobiographical masterpiece, was the final reckoning. It was Spielberg sitting down at 75 years old and finally, publicly, telling the whole truth about his parents' divorce. And in doing so, he revealed something that shocked even longtime Spielberg observers. It was not his father who had truly wronged him. It was more complicated than that. His mother had been the one to confess the affair to young Steven, had made him complicit in keeping the secret from his father and sisters, had placed a child in the impossible position of adult confidant. And Steven, being Steven, had carried that secret for decades. He had protected everyone. He had hurt himself. The Fabelmans was also a reconciliation. By the time the film was released, Arnold Spielberg had passed away in 2020 at the age of 103. He never saw the movie that his son made about him. The movie in which he was portrayed as a brilliant, loving, but emotionally remote man who simply could not compete with the extraordinary chaos and warmth of his wife. Steven Spielberg made that movie for himself, yes. But he also made it for his father. And for everyone who ever wondered why the most successful director in Hollywood kept making movies about fathers who could not quite connect with their children. Now, all of this background, the divorce, the estrangement, the reconciliation, the lifetime of emotional processing through art, is essential context for understanding the man who, at 79, drew a line and said, "There are people who will not be at my funeral." Because for Spielberg, the question of who belongs in his intimate circle has never been casual. It has never been about fame or status or professional alliance. It has always been about one thing: loyalty. Loyalty and the willingness to treat the people he loves with basic human dignity. And this is precisely where several high-profile names in Hollywood fell short. Let us begin with the incident that perhaps best illustrates Spielberg's uncompromising code of loyalty and respect. It was the early 2000s. Gwyneth Paltrow, who was at the time dating Ben Affleck, was like a goddaughter to Spielberg. He had known her since she was a child. Her mother, the actress Blythe Danner, was a dear family friend. When Gwyneth brought Ben Affleck into her life, he inevitably came into contact with the Spielberg family. What happened at one particular gathering at Spielberg's home has been described by eyewitnesses as a moment of astonishing thoughtlessness on Affleck's part. According to screenwriter Mike Binder, who's spoken about this incident publicly, Ben Affleck, in what may have been a moment of boisterous, careless fun, threw Spielberg's young son into a pool at a family gathering. The child cried. The moment was uncomfortable, jarring, and deeply disrespectful in the eyes of a man who views his family as sacred. What happened next tells you everything about how Steven Spielberg operates. He did not make a scene. He did not confront Affleck loudly or publicly. He did not tweet about it or give an interview. He simply made a decision. Quietly and without fanfare, Spielberg declined to hire Ben Affleck for a film project that Affleck was reportedly attached to, Mike Binder's Thriller Man About Town. And though the world did not know the full story at the time, the Hollywood grapevine whispered about it. There was no dramatic confrontation. There was no press release. There was just the unmistakable chill of being removed from a Spielberg project. In Hollywood, that chill is its own kind of declaration. But if the Ben Affleck incident was a private wound, the Megan Fox situation was far more public. In 2007, Michael Bay's Transformers became a massive franchise, and Fox was its undeniable star. Electric, incandescent, the kind of presence that made audiences forget to blink. By the time Transformers: Dark of the Moon was in pre-production, however, Fox had made comments comparing director Michael Bay to Adolf Hitler in terms of on-set behavior. The comment was explosive. And while Michael Bay himself was the one who ultimately ended their professional relationship, the fingerprints of someone with significantly more power were reportedly visible in the decision. According to multiple industry insiders, Spielberg, who was the producer on the Transformers franchise, made it clear that Fox's comments were unacceptable. The implication was not subtle. In Spielberg's world, you do not speak about your collaborators that way. Not publicly. Not ever. Fox was replaced, her character unceremoniously killed off, and her Hollywood trajectory shifted irrevocably. Now one can argue, and many have, that Fox's comments were perhaps too strong in their phrasing but not entirely without basis. Michael Bay has his own complicated reputation on set, and Megan Fox has spoken eloquently in subsequent years about feeling exposed and unprotected as a young woman in Hollywood during that era. But what the incident reveals about Spielberg is this: he draws bright lines around loyalty and decorum, and when those lines are crossed, even by people who may have legitimate grievances, the response is firm, swift, and permanent. These are not the only names. There are others, whispered about more quietly in Hollywood corridors. Directors who publicly undermined projects that Spielberg championed, critics who dismissed his most personal work as sentimental, former collaborators who shared confidential information with the press, actors who arrived on set with egos so inflated that it poisoned the creative environment Spielberg carefully cultivates. The Spielberg set is notoriously warm, collaborative, and respectful. He is known as one of the most considerate directors in the business, someone who learns the names of every crew member, who checks in on the emotional well-being of his actors during particularly demanding scenes, who brings the same level of care to the gaffer's work as he does to the lead actor's performance. When someone disrupts that environment through arrogance, betrayal, or disrespect, Spielberg does not forget. There is a deep irony in all of this that deserves acknowledgement. Spielberg has spent his entire career telling stories about redemption, forgiveness, and the capacity of the human heart to expand beyond its wounds. Oskar Schindler saved 1,200 Jews not because he was a good man at the start, but because he became one. Celie in The Color Purple survived unimaginable abuse and found not just survival but joy. Lincoln held the fractured soul of a nation together through sheer force of moral will and compassion. Spielberg has made forgiveness the beating heart of some of the most important stories ever committed to film. And yet, in his private life, there are people he has chosen not to forgive. Or more precisely, people he has chosen not to allow into the sacred, final space of his own goodbye. How do we reconcile this? How do we square the man who made Schindler's List with the man who reportedly keeps a mental list of those unwelcome at his funeral? The answer, I think, lies not in contradiction but in evolution. The older a truly self-aware person gets, the more clearly they see the difference between the forgiveness they owe themselves and the access they owe others. You can forgive someone completely, release the anger, release the bitterness, wish them well in whatever universe they occupy, and still choose not to hand them an invitation to your most intimate moments. Forgiveness, as Spielberg has lived it, is not the same as reconciliation. You can let go of the wound without letting the person who made it back into your space. This philosophical distinction becomes especially poignant when you consider what the concept of a funeral actually means. A funeral is not for the dead. It is for the living. It is the last story a person tells about themselves, who they loved, who they trusted, who they allowed to witness their most vulnerable chapter. Every person standing at that graveside is a character in the biography of the person being buried. And Spielberg, the ultimate storyteller, has decided that certain characters do not belong in his final chapter. Not because he is cruel, but because he is precise. Because the story of Steven Spielberg, as he wishes it to be told, as he has earned the right to tell it, is a story about the people who showed up with integrity and love, not the ones who showed up with cameras and agendas. Let us talk for a moment about the people who do belong in that story. Because the question of who Spielberg does not want at his funeral is ultimately inseparable from the question of who he does want there. And the answer reveals just as much about the man as the exclusions do. Kate Capshaw. They met on the set of Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom in 1984. She was the screaming, brave, hilarious Willie Scott, and he was the director who was supposedly completely unavailable to romance because he was still recovering from his first marriage to Amy Irving. Except that he was not available at all, because within a year of that first meeting, Steven Spielberg was completely, irrevocably in love. He waited for Kate. He converted to Judaism because it mattered to her and because, upon reflection, it mattered to him too. It connected him to the heritage he had too often taken for granted, to the family stories he had compartmentalized, to the history he would eventually channel into Schindler's List. They married in 1991 and have been together ever since. They have 7 children between them, 2 biological, 5 adopted or born from previous relationships, and their family has been described by those who know them as the warmest, most intentionally loving environment Spielberg has ever created. John Williams. If there is one human relationship in Spielberg's life that transcends the professional and enters something closer to the sacred, it is his partnership with composer John Williams. They met in 1974 and have collaborated on every single one of Spielberg's major films since Sugarland Express. Williams is the reason the shark in Jaws is terrifying before you ever see it. Williams is the reason the closing image of Schindler's List, the surviving Schindler Jews placing stones on a grave, makes every single person who watches it weep regardless of language, culture, or faith. Williams is the reason Indiana Jones walks with swagger and Edie flies. Their friendship is so deep, so creatively interdependent, so rooted in mutual reverence, that Spielberg producing the documentary music by John Williams, the very project that won him his first Grammy and completed his EGOT in February 2026, reads less like a professional collaboration and more like a love letter. An old man honoring the person who has given sound to his soul, his children. All 7 of them. From Sasha to Theo to Michaela to Max to Jessica to Destry to Sawyer. Despite everything, despite the divorce from Amy Irving that was contentious enough to require a prenuptial agreement to be litigated in court, despite the years on sets away from home, despite the relentless demands of a career that has never, not once in 50 years, shown any sign of slowing down, Spielberg has been fierce about his role as a father. He has spoken in interviews about the terror he felt at repeating his own father's emotional distance, about the determination with which he has tried to be present, available, emotionally engaged. His children are not props in his legacy narrative. They are the center of it. And then there is his Jewish community, his faith, his people. After years of downplaying his religious identity, particularly in his early career, when he was navigating a Hollywood that was both dominated by Jewish talent and complicated about it, Spielberg's Jewish identity has become the most publicly stated and passionately defended aspect of his personal philosophy. He founded the USC Shoah Foundation after making Schindler's List, driven by the urgency of sitting across from Holocaust survivors during the production process and realizing that these voices, these living testimonies, were going to be gone within a generation. He has recorded more than 55,000 survivor testimonies. He has made the preservation of that history his life's most serious work, the thing that will endure long after the final box office number is tallied. His faith is not decorative. It is structural. It is the foundation upon which everything else rests. All of which brings us back to the funeral. Because when you understand who Spielberg loves, Kate, John Williams, his children, his faith community, his closest collaborators, you begin to understand why he would want to protect the sanctity of that final gathering. A funeral is private prayer made public. It is the last act of a life story. And Spielberg, who has spent 79 years being extraordinarily precise about story, is not about to allow the final scene to be contaminated by the presence of people who never truly belonged in the narrative. The Hollywood establishment has reacted to the whispers about Spielberg's funeral list with a mixture of discomfort and fascination. Discomfort because it forces an uncomfortable question. In an industry built on networking, on the calculated cultivation of relationships that serve professional ends, on the careful performance of warmth and collegiality that may or may not reflect genuine feeling. In that industry, what does it mean when one of its most powerful members says, in effect, "I know the difference between the people who truly loved me and the ones who needed me"? Fascination because, honestly, everyone in Hollywood is keeping some version of this list. Spielberg is just the only one honest enough and powerful enough to let it slip. The reaction from the public has been different. Audiences have overwhelmingly responded to this story with recognition and empathy. Because most people, not just Hollywood legends, but ordinary people living ordinary lives, have their own version of this question. Who do you want at your funeral? Not who do you owe an invitation to. Not who will show up expecting one. But who, when the room grows quiet and the last piece of music plays, do you want standing in that room because they genuinely loved you? The universality of that question is part of why this story has resonated so deeply and so widely. There is something else at work here, too. Something quieter and perhaps more important than the celebrity gossip angle of the story. At 79, having completed his EGOT, having made his most personal film in The Fabelmans, having reconciled, however belatedly and however incompletely, with the ghosts of his parents' marriage, Spielberg is doing something that very few people in positions of great power ever do with any real authenticity. He is auditing his life. He is sitting with the full account of who showed up for him and who did not, and he is making peace with the mathematics of it. Not with bitterness, but with clarity. Not with vengeance, but with boundaries. There is a profound difference between these things and Spielberg, whose entire artistic philosophy has always been about the emotional precision of truth, knows the difference intimately. Think about what it takes to live a life like his. Think about the sheer volume of relationships navigated over 5 decades in the most ego-saturated, transactional, high-stakes professional environment on Earth. Think about the directors who were jealous, the actors who were difficult, the studio executives who tried to compromise his vision, the colleagues who smiled to his face and whispered against him in rooms he was not in. Think about the personal betrayals, friends who sold stories to tabloids, collaborators who took credit they did not earn, lovers who treated his vulnerability as weakness and his success as a resource to be extracted. And then think about a man who, through all of that, kept making movies, kept showing up, kept telling stories about hope and humanity and the fundamental decency of the human spirit. That kind of sustained, deliberate creative optimism in the face of repeated personal disappointment is not naivety. It is the highest form of strength. But strength has limits. Even for Steven Spielberg. And the funeral list, whatever its precise contents, whoever its precise names, is not a sign of weakness. It is the opposite. It is Spielberg at the summit of his life, finally giving himself permission to be honest. Not to the press. Not to the public. Not even necessarily to the people whose names appear on it. Just honest with himself. About who he trusts. About who he loves. About whose presence brings him peace rather than performance. About who, in the quiet mathematics of a life fully lived, actually showed up. There is a scene in Schindler's List that I think about often in the context of this story. It is near the end of the film, after the war has ended, after Oskar Schindler has given everything he has, his money, his factories, his safety, his reputation, to save as many Jewish lives as possible. He stands before the people he has saved, and instead of feeling triumphant, he breaks down. He looks at his car and says, "This car, why did I keep this car? 10 more people right there." He looks at his Nazi pin and says, "This pin, 2 people right there." He is consumed not by pride in what he did, but by grief over what more he could have done. It is one of the most devastating scenes in cinema history precisely because it captures something so profoundly, painfully human. The gap between the good we managed to do and the good we wish we had done. Spielberg has said in various interviews that Schindler's emotional breakdown at that moment was not planned. It emerged organically from Liam Neeson's extraordinary performance and from the weight of the story itself. But watching it now, with the knowledge of who made the film and why, it is impossible not to see something autobiographical in it. Steven Spielberg has spent his life measuring the gap between the good he has done and the good he wishes he had done. Between the relationships he saved and the ones he could not. Between the people he forgave and the ones he simply could not find forgiveness for no matter how hard he tried. The funeral list is part of that reckoning. It is Spielberg saying, "I've spent my whole life trying to tell the truest possible version of the human story. Now, let me tell the truest possible version of my own. Let me be honest, finally, about who was really there. And let me protect that truth, even in death." Since completing his EGOT in February 2026, the conversation around Spielberg's legacy has reached a new pitch. The Grammy victory for producing the music by John Williams' documentary was greeted with genuine joy across the entertainment industry, a recognition not just of his extraordinary filmmaking career, but of his role as a custodian of film music, a champion of the art form that has, arguably, shaped more emotional memories in more people than any other single musical tradition of the 20th and 21st centuries. John Williams scoring Spielberg films is not just a professional partnership. It is one of the great creative love stories of our time. And Spielberg, in producing that documentary and standing on that Grammy stage, was honoring it in the most public way possible. But EGOT status also marks something else. It is a completion. It is the final puzzle piece of a career that has, by any objective measure, done everything that could possibly be done in the entertainment industry. Emmy, Grammy, Oscar, Tony. Steven Spielberg has won them all. He has told every kind of story: adventure, horror, science fiction, historical drama, comedy, tragedy, war, hope, loss. He has directed more iconic films than any other living filmmaker. He has produced even more. He has launched careers and saved studios and reinvented the blockbuster and honored the Holocaust and made children fall in love with movies for 60 years running. At 79, he is not slowing down. He reportedly has multiple projects in development and shows absolutely no interest in retirement, but he is, for the first time, looking back as much as he is looking forward. And in looking back, he is seeing clearly. He is seeing the people who made the journey worthwhile. The people who handed him the camera when no one believed in him. The people who sat in dark editing rooms with him until 2 a.m, long after everyone else had gone home, because they believed in the story as much as he did. The people who told him the truth when the truth was uncomfortable. The people who chose him, not Steven Spielberg the brand, not Steven Spielberg the institution, not Steven Spielberg the check, but him, Steven the anxious kid from Cincinnati, who just wanted to tell a good story. And he is seeing with equal clarity the people who did not make that choice. The ones who smiled and shook his hand and said all the right things and then, when the moment came, chose their own interests over his trust. The ones who used proximity to his name as currency without ever truly earning the relationship that proximity implied. The ones who, in his most vulnerable moments, during the painful years of his parents' divorce playing out in public via the Fabelmans, during the personal struggles that have remained largely private but which those who know him well understand to be real and weighty, simply were not there. The funeral list, then, is not a punishment. It is a portrait. It is Spielberg painting in negative space the truest image of who he really is and who has really mattered. In the same way that his films tell the deepest truths through what is left unsaid, through the shadows between the frames, through the music that rises where dialogue fails, through the faces of children who understand more than adults give them credit for, his funeral list tells a truth about his life through the faces that will not be present. Every great story, Spielberg has said in various forms over the years, is fundamentally a story about relationships, about who people choose when the choosing gets hard, about who shows up and who disappears when the lights go down. His funeral is the final scene of the greatest story he has ever lived, his own. And like every scene he has ever directed, it will be exactly right. It will have exactly the right people in exactly the right places. It will be honest and warm and a little heartbreaking and ultimately, deeply, beautifully human. Because that is what Steven Spielberg does. He takes the raw, messy, complicated material of human life and he finds the story in it. He finds the truth beneath the surface, the light in the darkness, the connection beneath the wound. And he tells it in a way that makes you feel, even if only for 2 hours in a dark room with strangers, that it is possible to understand each other. That it is possible, despite everything, to be kind. At 79 years old, with a Grammy finally resting alongside his Oscars, with his EGOT complete, with 7 children and 1 extraordinary wife and 1 lifelong musical partner, and 50 years of films that will outlive everyone alive today, Steven Spielberg is not afraid. He has faced the things that frightened him most: his parents' divorce, his own absent father, his Jewish identity in a world that still, periodically, threatens it, the responsibility of bearing witness to the Holocaust, the isolation of genius, and he has made art out of all of it. He has metabolized his pain and turned it into empathy for the world. The list of who he does not want at his funeral is, in the end, just the other side of the list of who he does. And that second list, the people he loves, the people he trusts, the people who made him who he is, that list is long and luminous and well-deserved. When the time comes, whenever that time comes, the room will be full of the right people. The music will be extraordinary. John Williams will have written something that reduces everyone to tears and lifts them back up again in the same breath. And Steven Spielberg, even in his silence, will have told the best story of his life.